Hi, and welcome back. In this section, we're going to do some physiology, where we're going to look at the control of the digestive system activities, and specifically the coordination between the nervous system and the hormonal system, as well as local entities going on within the alimentary canal. And so what we have to realize that there are local mechanisms that affect the activity in the stomach and small intestine, but there are also central, as in central nervous system mechanisms that affect it. So in order to understand this better, we divide this into 3 phases that affect gastric secretion. The first phase is called the cephalic phase. So if you recall, cephalic means the head part. And so this is twofold. It's the first use of the word cephalic is just the sight of food, or thinking about food, or the smell of food, or tasting the food stimulates this. And where this affects is in the cerebrum, in the cerebral cortex. And specifically, if we look at the vagus nerve, coming off of the brain stem, we are going to have fibers that travel into the abdominal cavity and innervate the stomach and small intestine. And here in the cephalic phase, we are talking about the submucosal plexus, because we're talking about secretions coming from gastric pits and from glands. And so when we look at this, we can, the picture on the right, you can see that there's central nervous system impulse. So this is parasympathetic now, which is stimulating our enteroendocrine cells in the stomach, as well as our mucus cells, our chief cells, and the parietal cells. So the net result is we will have secretion of gastrin, as well as mucus, pepsinogen, and hydrochloric acid. So this is kind of what happens in the cephalic phase. We end up with a lot of gastric secretions. After the cephalic, and so the whole point of this, which only actually lasts a few minutes, is that it prepares the stomach for food to come into it, because this starts before the food actually enters the stomach. And this phase, although it's very short, will account for somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of all the gastric secretions. So after the cephalic phase, we move to the second step, which is the gastric phase. And there are 3 big categories of stimulation things going over here. The first thing is, now we have gastric secretions as well as food in the stomach. And this stomach being distended activates stretch receptors in the stomach, which then gives feedback to not only submucosal plexus, but now we are invoking our myenteric plexuses, affecting the 3 layers of smooth muscle in the stomach. This is all coordinated through the vagus nerve once again. In addition, because we have lots of hydrochloric acid being produced, that changes, that gives us a low pH, but the incoming food with its higher pH stimulates chemoreceptors, which also activate all of this. If we didn't have food and we only had the pH from hydrochloric acid, then our stomach pH would be less than 2, and that would inhibit secretion from parietal cells, as well as our enteroendocrine cells that secrete gastrin. So the presence of food actually elevates our pH, which actually activates this process even more. And the third part of this phase is we have undigested food in here, especially proteins, which are going to get activated on, and which also activate the production of hormones further on. So gastrin, in addition to stimulating our chief cells and our parietal cells, remember they were stimulated by those partially digested peptides, which made those enteroendocrine cells produce the gastrin, and then they worked on parietal cells and chief cells so that we could have pepsin, which would then digest the proteins. But in addition to that, the gastrin increases the activity, increases the parasympathetic nervous activity in the myenteric plexus, thereby giving us more peristalsis and churning. And this gastric phase lasts a significant amount of time, it's about 3 to 4 hours. And this basically is going to account for more than half of the gastric secretions. In our third phase, we are going to have gastric contents exit the stomach into the intestines. So this is why it's called the intestinal phase. So it's going to involve the duodenum, and there's going to be, once again, both hormonal and nervous reflexes. So this all starts when we have that partially digested food bolus with the liquid called chyme, which exits through an open pyloric sphincter and goes into the duodenum. So once chyme is in the duodenum, that triggers the duodenum to release hormones such as cholecystokinin, gastrointestinal inhibitory peptide, and secretin, as well as mucus secretion to try to protect those small intestinal cells from the effects of the acid chyme. Also realize that as contents leave the stomach and go into the duodenum, that the amount of distension in the stomach will decrease, but the amount of distension in the small intestine will increase. And so now, because we are going to be activating stretch receptors as well as chemoreceptors in the duodenum, we cause the activation of what is known as the enterogastric reflex. Entero meaning intestine. So a reflex between the small intestines and the stomach. And what this is this is an inhibitory reflex back to inhibit the vagus nerve effects on the stomach. So we're decreasing parasympathetic stimulation, and we are going to increase sympathetic nervous stimulation. And so the net effect of this decreasing parasympathetic as well as losing gastric contents means that gastrin is going to be inhibited. And also the sympathetic stimulation means the pyloric sphincter is going to be stimulated to contract. And that pyloric sphincter contraction then means more food is staying in the stomach longer. Okay. So the fact that we have food that enters the small intestine and distends it means it's going to be slower to exit the stomach, thereby letting more processing go in the stomach, as well as having all the hormones in the small intestine to be acting on smaller discrete packets of food, thereby enhancing their chemical digestion as well. So basically, this third intestinal phase will control the rate of gastric emptying. So hopefully you understood that, and I will see you again shortly as we return to talk about lipid metabolism. Thank you for all your work in understanding this anatomy and physiology of the digestive system.